Thanks to HBO Max for sponsoring today's video. Got like a strobe candle going on. You see that? This candle is just going wild. Doesn't that mean there's like energy in the home? Is that good or bad energy when it like strobes like that? Anyway, hey guys, today we're gonna be doing part 2 to the Reading Your Ghost Stories video. I do wanna make more of these videos because I love doing them. You guys seem to really enjoy these as well. And I'm excited to do part 2 this year and read even more stories. And since the last video, I've gotten even more stories. So this could be endless, an endless series because I have so many stories sent to me. Before we get into the stories though, I do wanna thank HBO Max for sponsoring this video. There's a new scripted true crime mini-series airing on HBO Max right now called The Murders at White House Farm. This is based on a true story that occurred in the 1980s that not a lot of people know about. To this day, there's still questions about the evidence and how this case was handled, which makes the series that much more interesting. This is one of the things that I'll be binging this Halloween season since it is the end of October now. I think this is a great show to binge right now. There's also a podcast that's being produced to accompany the series to kind of go into more detail about the case, and they also interviewed the father of the victims. And the show features some actors that you might recognize, including 3 actors from Game of Thrones. So if you don't have HBO Max already, click the link in my description so you can download it now and watch The Murders at White House Farm. I thought that was a very appropriate sponsor for today's video, given that you guys clicked on this video and are interested in scary stories, true scary stories, so I thought maybe you'd be interested in The Murders at White House Farm. Our first story comes from Leah, and she has provided her Twitter account, so I will link it down below. I used to live in a house from when I was 2 years old to about 13 years old in southern Maine. Oh my god, I'm so jealous. I want to go to Maine so bad. Like, that's my next trip for sure. My closet was at the end of my bed, and I could almost never sleep in my room because I would freak out and think something was in there. There was no door on my closet, so it was just a black hole at night, but I did hang a blanket over it to try to hide whatever or whoever was in there. Most nights I would run out of my room, cover my eyes, and sleep on my parents' floor. Some nights I just felt a strange presence, like something was in that corner of my room. Occasionally I would see a large shadowy figure of a man standing at the end of my bed. I couldn't make out his face or see any features, but I could tell he was very tall, at least 6 feet, and wore kind of like a top hat or a cowboy hat and a long trench coat. I don't remember him ever moving. He would just stand there staring at me, and I felt extremely cold and terrified. I'm not the only one who felt the presence of this man either. I moved into the spare bedroom next to my original bedroom, and one of my brothers, who is 12 years older than me, stayed in that room for a while. He said he felt some sort of presence or like something was watching him in that room. I hadn't told him anything about what I had experienced in that room. I'm not sure if he ever saw the man, but I know he and my parents felt something strange in there. When that room was still mine, I would move my room around just to try to get my bed away from the closet, but I always felt something strange coming from that corner of my room and couldn't even look over there. I refused to keep anything in my closet that I actually used because I was too afraid to go in it. As soon as I left the room, I could sleep perfectly fine. It didn't matter if it was on my parents' floor or the spare bedroom that I eventually moved into. The only time I've had a similar feeling was when I visited Edinburgh, Scotland, and took a tour of the vaults under the city. It was only a brief moment, and it wasn't quite as terrifying. What I find interesting in a lot of stories, especially ones that I've read on my channel, is a lot of people experience almost like the same visions or same ghosts, I guess, which isn't possible, obviously, because you're all in different parts of the world. This just isn't the first story that I've read of a man with a hat on. That seems to be a common occurrence with like a top hat or like a larger hat, or just a man in a hat. That seems to be very common in ghost stories. And I wonder why. I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting observation. So thank you, Leah, for your story. This next story comes from Bushra. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. A few months back, me and my mom were alone in the house. My older sister is a nursing student and had her clinicals, so she had left the house a couple hours before. My younger sister had work, so she wasn't at home either. My mom and I were doing chores that day, and we were coming in and out of the garage because we were moving things. Looking back, the day just felt off. I don't know how to describe it eloquently, but there was an intangible sense of uneasiness, if that makes sense. While we were both in the process of coming back into the house from the garage, when we both heard, clear as day, my older sister laughing from the direction of her room. She has a very distinct laugh, so there was no doubt it was her. Problem was, she wasn't in the house and hadn't been for a couple hours. I remember me and my mom whipped our heads to look at each other, our eyes wide. We both knew each other had heard the laugh. It was a very weird experience. Who, or more importantly, what had imitated her laugh? Who or what indeed? That's very interesting. I don't know if you guys can hear that. All right, we're just gonna ignore that. It's like shaking my decor right now. Okay, moving on to our next story. I want to preface that I'm a skeptic myself, although this did happen to me when I was still young and shook me at that time. It also may not be scary, but these things were what actually happened. For a little bit of background, when I was 11 years old, my uncle died at a young age of 28 in a car accident. This happened 4 days before Christmas and naturally had my whole family devastated. We are a close-knit family and my uncle used to come by our place at least 2 days a week, and growing up without a father in the house, he was almost like a father to me and my siblings. From the day he died, several people in my family started to experience things they couldn't explain, like little bells on the Christmas tree in my grandparents' house starting to make sounds without anyone touching them, or without a window being open for it to be able to be explained by wind or anything. Light bulbs suddenly stopped working at my aunt's place, and later she found out they were slightly unscrewed, and there was no one in her family, allegedly, that did it. One of the scariest ones, in my opinion, was with my brother, who at that time was 17. He insisted on not coming to my uncle's funeral because it was especially hard for him and he felt like he couldn't do it. But on the day before the funeral, my brother told us he was alone in his room and kept hearing his name whispered into his ear several times, and he could swear the voice sounded like our uncle and in a somewhat teasing tone. This led him to being too scared to stay at home that he ended up going to the funeral with all of us. We all joked at how it was our uncle scaring him to make sure he wouldn't skip out on the funeral. Our uncle was known to be a bit of a prankster, so all those little moments we were all joking about him trolling us all a bit as a last goodbye. Now to my own personal experience with the whole paranormal happenings surrounding my uncle's passing. On an afternoon, days, maybe weeks, I don't remember the timeline, after the funeral, I was alone at home and spent time in the living room listening to music on our CD player. Suddenly, I heard our VHS player starting to turn itself on and showing the rewind sign light up on the display. I didn't think much of it at first and just turned it off because these things used to be loud once they started rewinding. But when I went back to resume what I was doing, it went back on by itself to do the same thing. I think it did that a few more times, at least thrice, before I decided to let it run until it was done rewinding whatever tape was left in there. When the tape eventually was done completing rewinding, the rewind sign kept repeatedly flashing a few more times as if the player was trying to rewind the tape that was already completely rewound, when eventually the player gave up and instead pushed the tape out. That's when I checked what tape was in there, and when I looked at it, it turned out to be a copy of my uncle's wedding video. I will never forget the chills I felt that moment and was so overwhelmed I started crying. Sure, the VHS player was an old thing and this could be explained by it just malfunctioning, but it never did that before or after this instance. Well, that's definitely less of like a scary story and more of like a happy one in the sense that he could have been trying to reach out to you, which I think probably gave you guys some closure, I imagine. So the next story comes from Natalie, and I will link her Instagram down below. Our parents' house is not very old at all. It was built in the 1970s. However, everyone in the family has had inexplicable experiences we can only conclude as paranormal. Even my dad, who is perhaps the most skeptical person in the house, has had some strange experiences. We've all heard voices, occasionally we'll see strange shadows, and we've even heard footsteps upstairs when our dog has been playing by himself. One night a few years ago, I was up late watching videos on my laptop in my bedroom. I got up to use the bathroom and left the door slightly ajar. I was going to be quick and assume no one else was awake. I suddenly heard a female voice I did not recognize in the hallway and immediately stopped what I was doing. I quickly washed my hands and left the bathroom, convincing myself it was just my sister laughing or talking from her bedroom. I knew it probably wasn't her because her door was closed and she hadn't been in the hallway at all, and it was certainly not her voice. I got back in bed, and a few hours later I heard my sister get up to use the bathroom. Shortly after I hear her return to her room, she messages me asking if I had been in the hallway. My jaw dropped and I replied, freaking out, asking her if she had heard a woman in the hallway. She said yes, and I asked her to come to my room because I was so freaked out. My sister was so scared she didn't want to come to my room, so I went to her bedroom. She was pale white and absolutely terrified. Keep in mind, I was about 21 and my sister 24 at the time. We both agreed that what we heard was a female voice that neither one of us recognized, but it sounded as if she was having a conversation. Neither one of us could register specifically what was said because not only were we both scared, but it happened very quickly. That just scared the poop out of me. Both my sister and I had been up, but we were both watching videos with our headphones on plugged into our computers, so there was no way it was simply just audio from something we were watching online. The next day we told our parents. My mom was of course a little freaked out, and my dad was, as usual, his skeptical self. Neither one of them had been awake, so there's truly no way of explaining what we both heard hours apart in the same night. I was gonna say, could it have been your mother speaking, but I guess you said you didn't recognize the voice, and you probably would recognize your mother's voice. And sorry about my neighbors walking around upstairs. Again, ambiance. Does it give haunted house vibes to hear footsteps? Our next story takes place in a cellar, basically a basement, which I'm very excited about. This is from Finn, and I will link their Twitter down below. This happened in the 1980s. I was 14 and we were exploring the house, which was supposed to be haunted. It's a 3-story house with several rooms, attached barn garage, and even an indoor pool. The house was furnished and filled with dust, cobwebs, and furniture dating back hundreds of years. The cellar was your typical dirt floor and stone foundation affair, as any other house from the era would have. We had been exploring the rooms of the house. It was creepy, but we weren't afraid. The house made all sorts of noises, but we chalked all that up to an old house making old house noises. Besides, it was quite breezy outside, and several windows in the house had broken panes. As dusk approached, we were on the first floor and heard a distinct water noise coming from below. No utilities were on in the house, so it was curious. I decided to take a look, as we hadn't been in the cellar yet, and I was keen to see it. I opened the cellar door and was greeted with an old slatted wooden stair. I had a flashlight, so I turned it on because it was quite dark down there. I went slowly down the stairs and saw there were bricks forming a wall to my right, and knew it was the main chimney that went up through the house. To the left was a wooden slatted wall and railing to the bottom. As I got to the last stair and stepped onto the dirt floor, I looked ahead of me toward the far end of the cellar, about a dozen feet away. I could make out shelves and various things stacked on and around them, mostly mason jars filled with who knows what, bottles and boxes. Then I heard a drip and felt a breeze coming from my left. I turned and took a step past the stairway wall, and many things happened at once. I felt an oppression, like I was suddenly under many fathoms of cold water, pressure in my ears, cold, blurred sight. I saw what appeared to be a large pool of some sort of dark, viscous liquid on the floor a few feet in front of me, and a small, strange stalactite and stalagmite formations of a similar material. The pool appeared to move, like it had dripped on, but it wasn't right. Then the liquid formed a droplet there on the surface and appeared to drip upwards. My mouth opened in a grimace and my eyes tracked up towards where the drip went. There on the ceiling was what appeared to be another pool of the same strange liquid. Another droplet hit the pool on the ceiling and I blinked. I hadn't blinked since I turned the corner into the cellar. I opened my mouth to yell, but nothing came out. I turned and ran so fast that I nearly bowled my friend over. I knew that she had yelled something at me, but I was in full fight or flight mode. I didn't stop running until I got back to her house a mile away. When she caught up with me a few minutes later, she asked me what happened, and I told her. She later said that she could tell by the look on my face how terrified I was. We never really spoke of it again until decades later, and I have never to this day been back to that house. The closest I have been was recently. I went to visit at her house, which is just down the street. Now, as an adult with years of research into the supernatural of what that experience being a catalyst for, I must admit that I want to go back there and face that old fear. If I ever do and something happens, at least I have this account to say what happened there that day. That's definitely the most eventful story that I have read on my channel. Wow. Of course, I, as a skeptic, want to encourage you to go back there and see what it's like now, especially now that it's decades later. I am very curious. So this next story, the subject line is, I'm a nurse on a haunted unit, and this person would like to remain anonymous. When I was a nursing student, I was doing my preceptorship on a general medical floor where most of the patients were older adults. One night shift around 2 a.m., I had been in a patient room, finished helping them, and then came out to the hall to wash my hands at the sink. All of the lights were off, so the hallway was dark and nobody else was around, so it was quiet. As I was washing my hands, I distinctly heard the sound of children playing, giggling, chattering, etc. I knew that there were no children on that floor. I immediately got chills and walked as fast as I could to the nursing desk, spooked. I told everyone what I just experienced, and they replied, yeah, this floor used to be the pediatric floor, and proceeded to tell me that many people would see, hear, or feel strange things related to children. I have now worked on this floor for over 2 years, and there are frequently patients who tell me they see a little girl in their room, on the wall, standing behind me, etc. It creeps me out every time. See, I think a hospital would be the perfect place to experience something paranormal, because I don't want to get too morbid here, but think about all the people that have died. Like, they have a morgue in a hospital, and I don't know if people like think about that when they're there. I've never been admitted to the hospital, knock on wood. That just seems like the prime location to be haunted by a spirit or to experience some sort of paranormal type thing. Okay, we're gonna do one more shorter story. This person would also like to remain anonymous. When my brother and I were in our teens, we were carrying some stuff up to the attic for our dad. On one trip up, it took both of us to carry something. My brother went first and I was coming up behind him. When I got to the top of the attic ladder, my brother was just sitting there. I was like, dude, go. He turned his head towards me slowly. His eyes were rolled completely in the back of his head and he started shrieking. It was the most terrifying noise I have ever heard. I literally dove down the ladder screaming and ran into my room. Around 5 minutes later, he came down like nothing happened, though a little agitated. We never spoke about it back then. You might think it was just a prank on a sister by her brother, but a couple years ago, I am 30 now, so it's been around a decade, we were telling annoying sibling stories with our friends and he told me the story of that day. He remembered it completely differently. He thought I just left him up there to lug stuff to the other side of the attic by himself. I stopped him and said, that is not how that went down. When I told the story from my perspective, the color drained from his face. He had no memory of any of it, but said that now he understood why I would never go into the attic after that. Okay, so those are all the stories that I am going to read in this video. A lot of you, because I say in every video, I want something to happen to me, I'm jealous, like I want stuff like that to happen, even though I don't deal with like real life horror well at all as a horror fan. I don't like real life horror, but I do want to experience something paranormal one day and hope that I do. And a lot of you are saying, well, why don't you go to places that are notoriously haunted or most likely to be haunted, like go to actual locations, go randonauting, things like that. And I definitely would. I actually wanted to do that for so long and like vlog it. And then of course someone else made a series just like that, so I couldn't because it would be weird. And also money and right now COVID, so. But if that's something you guys would be interested in as a skeptic, trying to go ghost hunting or playing with a Ouija board or doing anything like that, as someone who doesn't believe, let me know if you're interested in that and I can try to do some stuff like that year round too, wouldn't just be Halloween time, because that would be my dream, honestly, to be able to travel to haunted places and make videos on it. Like, oh, that sounds so fun. If you have any other ideas for spooky videos or anything you want to see year round that doesn't involve traveling right now, because obviously that's not possible, let me know. As always, I will have the email where you can send your ghost stories in. I collect them all the time. A lot of these are from last year as well, so feel free to send in your ghost story at any time and I might read it in a future video. Thank you to everyone who sent in your stories. I love reading them, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.